So let me get this straight. When you're in K through 12, you're taught to never miss a day, focus for 8 hours a day with a 30-minute break, to do this from Monday to Friday, all while ensuring you give your boss/teacher the work she tasks you with, lest you want to be punished. Then suddenly, when you're in college, you're taught that you're only as good as you're an asset to somebody else, and what degree you got in, who did you intern for, and were you a profitable athlete if you had a scholarship. And that almost to me sounds like 22 years worth of conditioning to be the perfect employee. Oh wait, today I want to take a deeper look into hustle culture and how your boss and elites are laughing all the way to the bank while you chase a hollow goal. But before I say anything else, let me address a few things. First of all, thank you for all the views, likes, and subscriptions you guys gave me on the last video. I appreciate it a lot. It warms my heart that people can, agree or, see what I'm saying in this crazy game that we call society. But, rest assured we're going to get through it and we're going to make this world better. Next, please don't take this video the wrong way. It's more of a reminder to yourself, but we'll get to that in a second. But let me tell you a story about a warehouse job I had. It was about 5:45 p.m. and I was at orientation. I had came in already skeptical of what I had gotten myself into because they didn't even want a resume. They just hired me the second I threw an application in. But I needed the money, so there wasn't much wiggle room at the time. When we got there and, they walked us out, showed us around the factory, then they sent us off to our sections. And when I walked to my section, which was unloading, I'd seen an old man that we'll call John. I said, "What's up?" We talked a little bit, and, as we were discussing and just chatting about the job and, the higher-ups and all that, he had told me that he was retired and he was working to pass time. Now, right there, I was already blown away from that. And, I wanted to ask him if he had a magnum opus or a book or something, because, if you're retired, I'd imagine you'd work for, your biggest goal, whether it was a book or something, but I barely even knew him, so I didn't pry. I didn't even care enough. But I went back to what I was doing, and I went back to, sorting the boxes, did that for a couple hours, and it was about 12 in the morning at this time, and mind you, I was already so tired, There's actually goes a lot when you're sorting boxes that most people don't know about. But the manager comes up to me as I'm about to leave because the boxes stopped coming and we're done. And he said that we need to stay until everything is done, otherwise it'd be held against us. Now, I was instantly confused right there because on the application, I was only supposed to be working from the time I got in up until 3 hours max. But again, I needed the money, so I did it anyway. And the manager's name, we'll call him Mario, he had needed help loading 3 trucks. I sighed. I walked up to the guy who I was going to be helping, we'll call him David, and I helped him load it by pushing some boxes down the chute. As the boxes already started piling and spilling over the sides. Most of these boxes I had already sorted earlier. David started chanting, peak season, peak season. I had said out loud that he was quite passionate about, this workload. And basically he went on to explain to me how he's saving up for a Dodge Charger Hellcat. And this is nothing but pure money making right now. And man, I had to put on a fake smile because that was the first time I heard someone so passionate about giving their life clock to a warehouse with no breaks for pretty much a hollow cause and a depreciating asset. All while the manager is sitting on his phone in one of those, warehouse golf cart 3-wheeler thingies. And we finished up in about an hour or so. And I mean, I'm just drained. I am done. And as we were walking out, I asked if, we're going to do this tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And he immediately speaks over me, and he continues it and says, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And, not wanting to be awkward, I do a fake laugh, and, I look up since, I was looking down the whole time, and then I see it. At the top of the warehouse, there are jerseys of all the employees who have worked for over 25 years in that warehouse. And that was the final straw for me to make this video. And I want you guys to think about what I experienced in that day. I talked to an old man who, from what I can tell, has done nothing but work for someone. So now that's the only way, he can feel pleasure in his, final years, we'll call it. I stayed past the hours I applied for because I needed the money. And the guy who was happy about the workload said he was saving up for a pretty much hollow purchase, all while the manager is sitting down doing nothing right next to me. And then I see a bunch of shirts of people who donated their lifetime to touching boxes. And I can't be the only one who sees the issue with that alone. When everything is said and done and all you did was handle boxes. And this isn't to undermine them as an individual because, they're fathers, daughters, sons, all that. But nobody, when they were younger said they'd hoped to be handling boxes for over a decade when they're a child. They aren't superhumans either. They go home tired just as well as I did that night. And I can confidently say that when I went home, I just wanted to play the game and, go to sleep. And by the time that I woke up, it was time to go back to the warehouse. And my main issue with that is it felt like I accomplished, the world, all those boxes, all that heavy lifting. And in reality, I didn't do nothing but pay a bill. And, that's nothing bad, but there's no substance in that. It's only good for 30 days. And when you paint the dots all together of everything I explained, you see the truth of the matter that, everything that happened that night up until me going back to the warehouse, that was a reflection of modern day work culture. We're typically taught to be 15 minutes early, to be the hardest worker, to never miss a day and be the last one out. And it's not objectively bad, it promotes productivity, but unless you genuinely care about creating something for yourself, or you care about, your free time as a person who wants to enjoy things, it's not the best culture to have coexist. And I'm not going to play ignorance here, and I know just as I need a job for money, some people needed even more money, and that's normal in the environment we live in, especially in this economy. But for the most part, other workers, other coworkers I had were either working for luxury items or sports cars just because they wanted it. No, reason outside of keeping up with the Joneses, And that makes me want to ask you guys, how many people do you see on the internet or, in real life that's saving up or donating all their checks to, wanting to own the brightest Labubu or the newest BMW that we really don't need, or boomers hogging up all the job positions because they don't want to quote unquote lay around the house all day. And I can't fully blame people for keeping up with the Joneses or the old heads, because that's just the hustle culture that we live in. If you go to Instagram, you'll watch a reel about how if you're not putting in 80-hour work weeks while going to the gym twice a day while simultaneously creating a business and meal prepping all on 3 hours of sleep, then you just don't want it bad enough. Or how the higher ups will tell you that it's your coffee and your $1,000 phone, of which they made it that price, and no second job that stop you from having, the same financial wiggle room that they had. But truth be told, hustle and work culture has been a thing since the working class was established in America. And again, truth be told, it meant something a lot different back then as well. But people don't want to do that anymore. Nobody wants to work until the only thing that sounds nice when they're done is putting up their legs and watching the Kardashians. And most people don't even want to own a business just to have that luxury. So you're put into a cycle of either having to put in a lot of hours just to want to do nothing when you're done, or having to put infinite amount of hours into owning a business and possibly getting the chance at doing that something. And most people don't even want to do that. And that sounds crazy when, you say it out loud. Some people don't want to own a business where they have to try to force to turn a profit every year. Some people just want to, make music or create art or fish, hunt, or whatever it may be. And no, I'm not some raging liberal commie. I'm just a man who cares about individuals on a societal level. That shouldn't be a luxury that only the upper 1% are allowed to have. You look at Hollywood and just rich people in general and all their kids, they're doing, objectively the most unprofitable things, but yet their children are happy. And most people in the lower class don't get that luxury, But basically, to sum up what I'm saying is, chase your passion before your boss's profits, if it can be helped. Make that video you want, play that piano, use the guitar, use your PTO, call out, fake that you're sick. This is your one chance at life. And right now, at this very second, you're the youngest you'll ever be. And while you're still alive, you still have time to create something bigger than you, or not. You have that choice. But I digress, because I'm very tired and I need to be at work at 7 a.m, just like you.